To the leader, to David, a psalm. Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know my staying and my standing up. You tell my thoughts from far off. You read my roaming and my lying down. To you my ways are all well known. No speech is on my tongue but see, Lord, you know it through and through. You close me in front and back. You lay your palm upon me. This wondrous knowledge is loftier than me. I cannot master it. Where can I leave behind your spirit? Where can I break free from your presence? If I go up to heaven, you are there. If I spread my bedroll in Sheol, there too you are. And if I dwell upon the brink of dawn, or if I settle at the western sea's seam, even there your hand will lead me, your right hand will hold me fast. And if I say that darkness will conceal me and night will be my day, darkness is less dark than you, and night will shine like day. The darkness is as light. For you composed my inner being, were weaving me within my mother's bulge. I praise you fervently, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are splendid. My soul knows. My bones were not concealed from you, who formed me in the secret place, embroidering me beneath the soil. Your eyes watched over my inchoate mass. Upon your book all days were writing, transcribed when even one was not complete. To me, how weighty are your thoughts, O God, how great the sum of them. They number more than all the grains of sand. The end comes. I am with you still. God, if you kill the guilty and men of blood, spare me. Your foe strides speaking malice, conveying empty lies. Do I not hate them who hate you, Lord? I despise them who rebel against you. I hate them with sheer hatred. They are my enemies. Examine me, O God, and know my heart. Assay me, know my turmoil, and see if any false god way is there, and lead me in the ancient path. The poet Emily Dickinson left behind a large body of work largely written during the Civil War. There was something about the stress of those times and her fear for her loved ones that moved her to write, to express herself. I think the psalmist in Psalm 139 was similarly driven by the stresses in his life. As we go through the psalm, we'll see what those were. Who was he or she? We don't know. But there's a book called Touching the Rock, An Experience of Blindness by John M. Hull. He was a theologian, is a theologian, and he became blind in his adult years. Based upon his experience of blindness, he became convinced, reading Psalm 139, that the psalmist, like him, was blind. I have become convinced that John Hull is absolutely right, and we'll see where the psalm evidences that. Let's get to it. One theme that runs throughout the psalm is the theme of God and his ability to break through limitations, break through barriers that confine mere mortals. It begins with a very profound example of that. There's something called the theory of mind. The anthropologist T.M. Lohrmann discusses that theory of mind in her book When God Talks Back. She discusses how when a child is born, they don't differentiate between themselves and the outer world, and as time goes by, they learn about the what is me and what is everything else. And what is everything else, and indeed what's in them, becomes increasingly in focus as time goes by. And one of the things they learn is the theory of mind. That is, that what's in their mind is not necessarily known to others until they choose to communicate it. And what is in other people's minds is not known to them until that other person chooses to communicate it. As time goes by, they become increasingly sophisticated in their ability to map what's in their head into the heads of others. But it's not so at first. Well, this first part of the psalm addresses the theory of mind, because what T.M. Lohrmann says, what much of her book is about, is how evangelicals and Christians generally learn that despite everything they learned as infants about the theory of mind, there is one who can penetrate their mind. There's somebody who knows them better than they know themselves, who can search their soul, and that's God. It's a reversal of the theory of mind. And that's how this begins. And that's a very, very profound thought. Maybe as Christians we grow so accustomed to the thought that it's not a big deal, but it is. And the psalmist articulates it perfectly. He talks about how God knows everything about him. No speech is on my tongue, but see, Lord, you know it through and through. Other translations say, before a word is on my tongue, or before any speech is on my tongue, Lord, you know it altogether. And that might illustrate this psalm, might illustrate this point even better than my own translation. And this idea of God's access to things, ideas, places that we have no access to as mortals continues. There's the knowledge barrier. This wondrous knowledge is loftier than me. I cannot master it. God knows all. We know just a sliver about the universe, perhaps even just a sliver about our own minds. But God knows it all. Where can I leave behind your spirit? Where can I break free from your presence? We might be able to outrun an enemy or even a loved one, but we cannot outrun God. God is there ahead of us. And the extreme expression of this is, if I go up to heaven, you are there. If I spread my bedroll in Sheol, there too you are. Those are two places where we as mortals will not see. But God is there already. And if I dwell upon the brink of dawn, or if I settle at the western sea's seam, even there your hand will lead me, your right hand will hold me fast. Isn't that an interesting thing? Even there your hand will lead me, your right hand will hold me fast. Maybe that's evidence that John Hull might be right. Because who in these times would be led by the hand except a blind person or a child? Obviously he's not a child. But the other point here is that he sees the brink of dawn so far away. I don't think we can appreciate what these distances represented to people in the time that this psalm was written. because we're accustomed to getting in our cars or getting in jets, and we can be anywhere in the world in a day or so. But at a time when walking was the principal means of travel, to go to the horizon was a long journey, and it might be that many people, except perhaps for pilgrimages, never took such a journey. And when you talk about the western seas seam, that's again beyond people. Maybe a sailor could go that far, but even fishermen tended to toil close to the shore. So the western seas seam was a vast distance away, and yet not only is God there, but he's able to help us when we get there. That's going to be very important later. And not only is God not limited by what's in our heads and what's outside. Not only can God penetrate our minds, not only is God unlimited as far as geography goes, but he's unlimited by that darkness that falls on humanity at night. Again, that might not be something we can appreciate was a limiting factor for ancient humans in this era, because we can go to Vegas or New York or Los Angeles or even our own hometowns and the lights never entirely go off. It wasn't so in this time. And if I say that darkness will conceal me and night will be my day, darkness is less dark than you, and night will shine like day. That's sort of a strange translation. And darkness is less dark than you. We don't like thinking about God as being dark, but I chose to translate it that way because I think it's pretty, as far as I could tell, it was a close rendering of the words. But it suggests that God is dark. I mean, dark, at least in the Hebrew lexicon, was a metaphor for misfortune. Are we saying that God is misfortune? I take this to mean something like God is not afraid of danger. Danger needs to be afraid of God. God is so all-encompassing that even darkness pales compared to God. That's how vivid, living, and powerful God is. Let's go back to the line before that. And if I say that darkness will conceal me and night will be my day, again, I'm going back to what John Hall wrote. Doesn't it sound like this is something written by somebody who either in the past or presently is discovering their blindness or their coming blindness? And yet, God is close to them, and that gives them hope. And now we reach another barrier broken, because the creation of the child in a mother's womb, in her belly, in the bulge, is something that is was mysterious to men in these times, and women too, but to God, he is not only completely cognizant of what's going on, he's actively involved in this consummately private place where life is created. And so it says, "For you composed my inner being, were weaving me within my mother's bulge." Skipping over 14, verse 15 goes, "My bones were not concealed from you, who formed me in the secret place, embroidering me beneath the soil. Your eyes watched over my inchoate mass." It's interesting, this conversation about soil as an analogy or a metaphor for the womb. That's going to become important later too. We're going to get back to that. I want to step back now to the verse that I skipped over. I praise you fervently, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are splendid, my soul knows. Well, this is being said by a man who's going blind or is blind, has gone blind. And yet, throughout this, he recognizes the perfection and the beauty of God's creativity and making, and he recognizes it in himself. Could it be that he is bursting a bond? Could it be that in the course of this psalm, or before he wrote the psalm, he's expressing the idea that the limitations on him, his coming blindness or his blindness, are not nearly as important as his ability to begin to clasp at this great mystery that is the Lord. And that's why he can say, with all of the darkness closing in around him, I praise you fervently, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. And then it goes on, continuing with the second part of verse 16. Upon your book all days were writing, transcribed, when even one was not complete. Strange. As I was translating that, it just looked to me that that word writing in the Hebrew was a verb used for something ongoing, so I translated that as were writing, and it's so far as I can tell, the days that we're writing. And it's a strange thought, isn't it? Maybe somebody in the comments section will point out what I missed. I'm a student, and I translate these things just because I happen to delight in translating. All I can say about that is that there's another psalm that talks about one day or one night speaks to another, yet their voice is not heard, and this seems to be akin to that idea. We don't think about days writing, we don't think about nights speaking to each other, but there you go. And it sets up marvelously verse 17, to me, how weighty are your thoughts, O God, how great the sum of them. They number more than the grains of sand. The end comes, I am with you still. This harkens back to what he said earlier in the psalm about God's thoughts are above him. He cannot master God's thoughts. It's a statement of humility about the greatness of God and the comparative blindness, if I can say it, the comparative limitations of humans, of the limitations of our mortal minds. Now, we come to a part that is, or at least it seems initially, to be very jarring. But in fact, it's seamless with the rest of the psalm. If God, you kill the guilty, the men of blood, spare me. Your foe strides, speaking malice, conveying empty lies. Do I not hate them who hate you, Lord? I despise them who rebel against you. I hate them with sheer hatred. They are my enemies. Examine me, O God, and know my heart. Assay me, know my turmoil, and see if any false god way is there, and lead me in the ancient paths. You see how he's ending it. He's ending where he begins. He started the psalm talking about how God penetrates his mind, how God knows him better than he knows himself. And in the end, he's asking God, please, Lord, do it again. Figure out why my mind is in turmoil. And as we look at that issue of him being in turmoil, we get to what I think is really the core, the heart of this psalm. But I just want to mention immediately that it ends where it began, and as Mary Carr said in her book on writing memoirs, it creates a satisfying click when literature does that. So let's talk about this turmoil. He knows that he feels the turmoil, but he doesn't know what the origin is. And that's why he's talking about God killing the guilty, sparing him, and how much he hates the enemies of God, because that's just the way people thought back then. I mean, even through the feudal era, if you had a master, you were expected to hate the master's enemy. And if the enemy went to war, you were expected to lay your life down for your master, for your king, for your Lord. That was the contract. The Lord was supposed to give you victory, your human Lord, and you were supposed to give absolute fealty to the Lord, to your human Lord. And he's taking this idea and transferring it to God. So if your worldly Lord demands absolute fealty, you must hate your Lord's enemies. Well, that's what he's saying he's doing here. So since he believes that, and since he's saying it, and since he's being truthful to God about this, he does not understand why he feels this inner turmoil. Isn't he right with God? But he's not. That's not the issue. Let's get to the nub. What's going on here? Well, there's a little breadcrumb trail through the psalm. Let's see what it is. So, to resolve this mystery, let me point out something about ancient Hebrew poetry, which people like experts like Robert Alter and Frank Kermode point out. Ancient Hebrew poetry loves parallelisms. So if you see one thing, expect another. That's why, for example, there will be 2 beats to every verse, sometimes 3 beats. That's why when you read a Proverbs, in Proverbs, things will be paired. Either one idea will be followed by a similar idea, or maybe even an idea that is opposite, an antiphonal idea. But there are paired ideas, and there's one idea that sort of threads its way through the psalm, and by identifying that, you see what's troubling the this psalmist. And the idea, the thing that threads through this psalm, is the idea of death. So, let's see if I can justify that. Psalm 7, where can I leave behind your spirit? Death is a candidate as the answer to that rhetorical question. And then, if I go up to heaven, you are there, and if I spread my bedroll in Sheol, the place of the dead, you are there too. And if I say that darkness will conceal me and night will be my day, again, night being darkness, being adversity, that sounds like it could be a hidden or a metaphorical reference to death. Then there's all of this discussion about the psalmist being formed in his mother's womb. Well, again, what we were just talking about as far as parallelisms. If there's life, if there's inception, there's also death. And then there's that interesting metaphor using the soil under the ground as a metaphor for the conception, for the creation of the human being, the creation of life. Well, what's our other experience of soil? Well, it's when we're buried. So, again, there's this reference, there's this sort of like completeness, there's this completing of the thought. From the clay you came, to the clay, or to the dust, you will return. So this idea is all through the psalm. If God, you kill the guilty and men of blood, spare me. Okay, so, but it's interesting that I think the solution to that is somehow also implicit in Psalm 139. Because he talks about his closeness to God, how God will be with him even in Sheol, how if he flies to the western sea's brink, God will be there to lead him. There's this sense of God's omnipotence. There's this sense of God's care and love for this man or woman throughout the psalm. And this is a God that is not bound by barriers. I think what's going on here is ultimately what this psalm is saying is, or asking, can't that God who knows no bounds take me across that undiscovered country from which none return? The psalm does not answer that question, but it raises the question. The psalmist doesn't know the answer, but he knows that God knows the answer, and perhaps that's sufficient. I'm not sure that he knew that this is what was troubling him, but he might have. Perhaps the question, the rhetorical question, the request for God to examine him and find out what was troubling him was simply a literary device for him to produce a fairly subtle psalm about the fear of death, raising the possibility that there might be something beyond the life that we know in this world. I hope you've enjoyed this discussion. If you do, I wouldn't mind at all if you hit like. If you want to make some comments, maybe you have some disagreement with how I've translated the psalm, please feel free to leave a comment.